Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Banerjee, part of your marketing team over here at Ex Libris, North America, and welcome to this webinar. It's the last webinar of the year, and it has the record for the longest title, How the Pandemic Has Affected the Role and Expectations of Canadian Academic Libraries and Their Technology Needs. Right, my panel today is Susan Powelson from University of Calgary, Dale Story from University of Regina, and Justin Anders from Mount Royal University. And I'd just like to ask Susan, why don't you go first, introduce yourself and let them hear your voice.
Certainly. So I'm Susan Powelson. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Technology, Discovery, and Digital Services. And I'm here today to talk about the tech impacts, because that's firmly in my sandbox.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Susan, for joining us. Dale.
Hi, I'm Dale Story, Associate University Librarian for Content Management and Discovery, and I'm here also to talk about tech impacts and student experience there. So.
Excellent. Justin, over to you.
Hello, I'm Justin Anders, the Director of Library Technology. Obviously, technology is in my realm here. I'm responsible for the plan and selection, adaptation, integration of technologies at our libraries. So I'm excited to talk about what we've been doing and hearing what these other institutions are doing.
Very grateful to all three of you for joining me. And again, I'm Bob Banerjee. I'm this guy over on the left-hand side. And let's move on. Let's move straight into the content. So the agenda is very simple. This is a fairly unusual webinar if you're not used to my webinars. Basically, I've only got 4 slides plus the agenda slide. The rest is going to be conversational, so it's more of a radio experience. I've divided the agenda up into chronological order, and apologies in advance for the British sense of humor, but basically, I want to wind the clock back to a point where there were unicorns and rainbows and everything before March happened. So we're going to cover that era. And then, of course, the week that it all hit and we went into lockdown and absolute chaos broke out, we'll cover that transition point, that those fairly short number of days or short number of weeks. And then the period after that, typically March, April through to about now, where you're dealing with the aftermath, you're doing longer term changes, you're stabilizing, you're trying to keep the boat afloat. And finally, looking ahead to how you're going to rocket power your university, or what on earth you're going to do over the next, say, 2 to 5 years, based on the experiences of the last year, whether those influence you at all. So with that, we're going to break it down into 4. Here are my 4 slides. The first one is pre-COVID. So in terms of expectations of your patrons, the systems that you have, the processes you have, Susan, why don't you take it away? Explain to us a little bit about what you did.
Sure. So pre-COVID, we were very much moving towards a self-service model where we could. We bought reserve kiosks so that students could get their print reserve items. Whenever the buildings were open, we put some of them outside of the branch libraries, again, expanding that access to those materials so that the students could get at them where they were and when they were there. So self-service was really big for us. We were looking at how our desk was staffing, the impacts of moving to more self-service around our staffing models. We were an online preferred library when it came to collections, online preferred, but we were still buying print. We did know that students liked things online, but we also heard complaints from faculty and students about reading things online. So we were just balancing that. We knew we were heading in that direction, but we weren't aggressively pursuing it. So those were the things that we were looking at. We'd implemented, as I said, the kiosks, we'd implemented memos, those kinds of things to allow students to do things for themselves.
Thank you. Dale, what about you, pre-COVID?
So I would say we weren't moving towards self-service as much as U of C was, but we had the standard tools, a self-check system. We had kind of a SpringShare Lib apps platform that would allow self-booking rooms and things like that. We had migrated to Alma and Primo in 2017. and we were certainly online preferred in our circumstance, although recognizing that certain disciplines wanted print still. One of the biggest trends that we were observing was actually around course reading lists in advance of this, and we had actually begun our Leganto implementation in September 2019, and that was actually our copyright and scholarly communications librarian had observed a general trend of instructors wanting to make more and more electronically available for students. And this was driven by the collaborative nursing program where students were located across the province, but it was also observed in other requests too. And although we had an e-reserve system at the time, it wasn't well integrated with our physical reserve processes or our Primo system. And I actually see a lot of the things we were discussing pre-COVID around this, around digital access to resources. We had a textbook collection that was extremely popular, but a lot of it was around access to course materials and trying to keep costs down for students. And certainly there was misunderstandings before of instructors not understanding licensing restrictions of e-textbooks in our environment, but that certainly accelerated afterwards. So I think that's, a lot of similarities between us and U of C. We weren't going quite so firmly in the self-service direction as they were at that point.
Thank you, Dale. There's a quick question. Maybe you can summarize it.
Sure. Someone's
asking, what is Leganto? We can't take it for granted. People know the names of products.
Yes, Leganto is an Ex Libris product. It's integrated with Alma and Primo, and basically what it is, it's a reading list software. It allows you to leverage what's in your library collection, and so instructors can create a reading list for their students arranged by week, and they just do searches in the discovery system Primo, and then import those into a reading list. And one of the things we had done behind the scenes is if there were requests for, we would digitize things as part of that, and also our copyright management was part of Leganto and our previous e-reserve system as well. So if we need to obtain copyright permissions for a course, that would all happen through this software. So it's really an integrated solution for profs looking to create a reading list that integrates with our learning management system, which is Moodle.
Thanks a lot for clarifying that. If that answers your question, great. If it doesn't, just send a clarifying or follow-up question, please. Justin, take us back to January, March, that kind of time frame. What was it looking like for you?
It seems like a different world. I'm thinking back that far. We're lucky to be in a beautiful, fairly new, state-of-the-art library. We were 2 then, we're 3 now. And a big focus was we were trying to provide the same experience users had come into a new, beautiful, state-of-the-art building digitally. Our website and our digital presence was dated and not streamlined. So focusing on making our website more user-friendly, again, trying to match that physical presence, focusing on fixing some of the original technology that came with the building to work the way that we need it to work, doing improvements in our group rooms, introducing a wireless access device. So instead of using the resident computer, users can take their computer in there, their phone, their tablets, and present wirelessly on there, rolling out digital signage and wayfinding, and continuing to streamline our Elma instance. This summer will be 3 years since we've been Elma, so we're still learning things all the time and trying to make the most of it, trying to be as productive as we can be. Also working to launch a new institutional repository, which has since launched. And we started looking for a replacement to a storage solution for our streaming videos. And as what Dale said, we're also a very SpringShare Elma institution, so users could book rooms and register for events through our website. But again, not as users booking by themselves as we could be like the UOC.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Justin, while I've got you on the mic at the moment, why don't you take the next slide, which is when the unicorns and rainbows all faded away and this thing happened. We were meant to hold this event in Scottsdale in the spring, but obviously it got delayed. Then we finally did it virtually. It was Director Symposium. where we brought a number of senior folks from various academic institutions around the world to one place. And one of the comments that was made by a dean was, more change happened in the first 10 days of the lockdown than we accomplished in the previous 10 years. That seems a rather outrageous comment, but I wonder if it resonated, and if it doesn't, what happened to you during those few days and weeks?
Those first week, 2 weeks were a blur. Looking back, all those changes we made, hundreds of reactive changes to reflect this new reality, both for our website and, again, hugely trying to promote to our users that we are still accessible to them. You can still use our services just through our website. Tons of configurations that we had to change in our systems to, again, reflect that reality. And again, trying to promote how our services could still be accessed just virtually. So doing that through the website, through social media. It changed our library's presence. We were fully digital, and we're leading up to the work from home orders. Just as a staff and solution, I had met with each library staff member to confirm that they had high-speed internet at home, and if they had a computer that they could make use of. And if they didn't have a computer they could make use of, I gave them a laptop in anticipation if we did get sent home. And again, moving all of our staff to work online. Some of that was easier than others. Dedicated people on chat, our numbers have gone up hugely. I think we've had 8,000 chats since the start of this whole thing, 2,000 SMS messages. For our library faculty and subject specialists, this meant transitioning their consultation appointments to a virtual environment. Relating to the sentiment, I can relate to it. We made tons of changes. A lot of those changes in those first couple of weeks were fairly small and easier to make than a lot of the changes that came afterwards, I believe, since then.
Okay, and we'll get to that on the next slide. Thank you very much. Dale, what about you? What was easier than expected? What was much harder than expected?
Yeah, I definitely hear what Justin is saying. With there were a million little changes that happened in those 10 days. I can relate to the sentiment, and I think all the things Justin was discussing are things that we were trying to do as well. Interestingly, I discussed this question with our university librarian, Brett Waytuck, and the thing he said about this, which really stuck with me, was our services largely didn't change, but all of our processes for those services changed. And certainly, not only that, but the students' processes by which they would get in touch with us would change as well. So, although we couldn't lend physical materials or laptops or iPads, and there was no more study space, there was reference questions were still reference questions. We taught classes, we provided access to resources and attended meetings, but it was actually just the switching from a frame of reference where everything was kind of on campus to one where everything was remote. And so, yeah, Justin referenced chat and email, which were kind of no longer secondary contact methods, kind of done off the side of the desk. We saw a 4 to 6 times increase in chat volume those first couple of weeks, and so it was setting up the processes, the staffing, so that everything was in place there, and managing everything through Zoom. So in some ways, it almost doesn't feel like we've accomplished a ton of little things in 10 days, but more so it was almost the adaptation of everyone in the university. It's like we learned to behave or to work with each other in this offline world or online, remote world in a very short time. It was a lot of how do we translate these relationships to doing things over Zoom or doing things over chat.
Got it.
One more thing. Since this is a talk about technology and the impacts of technology, our AVP of IT, I was on the IT continuance team that was looking at the transition to remote learning, and he commented that if this would have happened 5 years ago, it would have been a much harder transition. And when I think about some of the systems that have changed over in the past 5 years, and certainly things like Zoom, where and the e-conferencing, how much web conferencing has improved. I certainly think about that. So in some ways, the first 10 days did seem easy, partially because the foundation was in place for everything to change. It just had to happen.
Do you mind if we just dig into that just for another 30 seconds or so? You mentioned Zoom and video conferencing, and everyone, well, not everyone, a lot of people have laptops, and a lot of people with laptops have cameras built into them. The ability to do things like to stay in visual touch is much greater. But what other examples of technologies made the transition, this overnight transition, easier 9 months ago than if it had happened in the mid 2000s?
Oh, okay. Well, I will just say cloud-based software is one thing, and also just I would say it's much more user-friendly systems that we have now compared to 10 or 15 years ago. So just setting up, and not to say that it's trivial to change these things, but things like extending loan periods and changing circulation policies, and even things like setting up digitization requests or updating the website quickly or creating web forms quickly. So we had started using LibWizard just prior to this, and it's one of those things where you can have web forms up in very quickly, and lots of information about the requests that are coming in. And also we didn't have to stand up any, these are all just services where we can license things, and they come, you sign off on the license one day and it comes into existence the next day, and that's really, really helpful in this environment. And that's not something that was necessarily the case 10 or 15 years ago.
Got it. Thank you. So basically what happened was the services that you provided remained largely unchanged, but how they were delivered changed. All right. Thank you very much. Susan,
and
what about you?
Yeah, and I would echo what Dale was saying just in that last question. So proactive chat, for example, chat reference was hard 5 years ago because of the mechanisms that delivered it. But then it got to be easier and easier, and we could set it up so that proactively that little box popped up. And I remember a few years ago when I said to the team, oh yeah, just turn proactive chat on. And our chat stats tripled overnight, which told us that yes, students want to ask questions on chat. They don't want to get up and walk down and line up for a desk. So chat reference and moving totally to chat reference and extending those hours is definitely one of the ways that we changed, and changed rapidly. We didn't have any other way to deliver it, but we did continue to deliver reference and research support through chat, and successfully. I don't have statistics like Justin does, but I do know that the demand has been high. So that's definitely a service that we were able to pivot to really quickly. We were able to staff really quickly, and everyone participates. And that, I think, is an interesting thing, as opposed to the desk schedule, which generally was staffed with non-academic staff. All staff participate in chat. Moving to e-reserves, we were seeing a trend towards, despite all of my physical pick up your reserve lockers, we were also seeing faculty incorporating more and more e-reserves in their reserve readings. And we had to pivot fast to get reserve materials available to students when the things in the lockers were no longer available. So we definitely changed fast in those first 10 days. But I agree with what Dale reflected on his conversation with Brett, that it was the processes. We were still delivering the same services, we were just delivering them differently. And in some ways, sometimes maybe more effectively, because we were where the students needed us to be, as opposed to them having to, for example, come down and line up and ask a question at a desk.
Got it. Susan, forgive me for not knowing, but the switch to, you said faculty were making rapid increase in use of e-reserves, right?
I won't say rapid. I would say that they were starting to incorporate more e-reserve. It wasn't rapid, but it was starting. We were starting to see a little bit less print, a little bit more e.
Okay.
pre-COVID.
Okay, so just to play devil's advocate, wouldn't one expect that at the point of lockdown, faculty says, oh my goodness, we have to take a 180-degree turn towards e-reserves?
Oh, and
Wouldn't
that's
you
exactly what happened. So I'm sorry, I may be not answering the question quite appropriately. Prior to lockdown, faculty were starting to move towards e-reserve.
Right.
With lockdown, with COVID, they didn't have a choice. They had to pivot. We had to pivot. We had to figure out how to make that happen for them.
So I just want to dwell on that for one more minute. How on earth does an institution as big as University of Calgary pivot in a matter of hours or days to suddenly take an enormously higher demand for e-reserves? What kinds of things did you have to do?
Well, we had to work with our collections team, had to look at licensing for unlimited users. And I don't have the right language for that, I apologize. But so that more than one person could read the item at a time. The subject librarians had to work with their faculties to identify alternative resources. We had to work with our copyright department, or the copyright department had to look, is this just a chapter? Are we able to digitize this because it's not a substantial portion of the item? So we had to go through all of these sorts of things to make these things available.
Wow, sounds fantastic.
Everyone was involved, yeah.
It was frantic. And was everyone working remotely at that point, or were you still in a shared office?
Most were working remotely at that point.
Ooh.
Yeah, so lots of challenges there, but people adapted quickly, which was great to being able to work from home.
Just had to.
You just had to.
All right. So we're halfway through. Let's switch to slide number 3, where we switch to after the lockdown. We're talking about April, May through to the current day. It's a very general thing, but I'm just interested in what you did. And Susan, while I've got you on the line, you may as well go first. What kinds of things did you experience over those last 6 to 8 months?
So our significant transitions, we did a rapid implementation of Leganto because we knew we needed a better way to deal with reserves. I'd been looking at Leganto for a few years. I'd been curious about it. I liked what it did, but to get the funding and the institutional will to move forward with it, I hadn't been successful. With COVID, I just said, this is going to help us do this, and was told, do it. The rapid implementation was great. It was 5 weeks. It was basically Leganto now, so it was out of the box. But it then created an easier mechanism embedded in D2L. We called it the reading list tool for faculty to use the reading list tool to create their reading lists. We haven't necessarily quite had the uptake that I'd hoped, but there were a few timing and other issues around that. I think just faculty were overwhelmed. So that was interesting. Here I thought I was doing this great thing, but they were so overwhelmed with just teaching online. The timing of when faculty create their reading lists for the fall term, which I kind of thought would be in the summer, but by the time we launched, which was the beginning of July, we'd kind of missed that window. We did have some courses use them, but we didn't have as many as we'd hoped. But that was one of the big transitions for us. And we're still working our way through that and working our way through the processes to make that tool work effectively for us. We brought in seats for booking computers and study spaces so that we could contact trace and know who was there. And I think that might be a product that we continue to hang on to and use. There's a variety of ways that we can implement that for even our high performance computers. We think we're going to need something like that it would really help us down the road. But just during this year, of course, more ebooks, unlimited rights to ebooks. Those were the things that we pivoted to. That was the collections team working on that. And those were the transitions. I mean, print, we've bought very little print in the last 6 months and really have moved towards the ebook.
Got it. Susan, one question has just come in. Someone's asking, what are the typical arguments that you used to hear for not having or not permitting a reading list solution?
It was just basically a nice to have. And it was not inexpensive, and it's working the way it's working right now. Faculty are used to it. Why would we want to move? Those were the kinds of things. And I will confess that while I proposed it, I also had lots of other things on the go. So if I met resistance, I didn't push too hard to make a compelling argument, because then I just wouldn't have to deal with it for a little bit longer. But I would propose it every so often. Our vice provost of teaching and learning had seen it at Memorial and really liked it. So I knew I had an advocate, and it was something I would want to move on while she continued in that position. But like I said, I just didn't get people leaping all over it. So I went on to the other things that I had to do, and I just bring it up periodically.
I'm sure other
shift. Yeah.
I'm sure other people are hearing those same kinds of comments or questions. So just switching on the fantasy mode just for one moment. If you wind the clock to a year or two ahead, further down the road, and let's say this reading list solution has turned out to be everything you hoped for and more, what are your hopes about what it will do, what it should do?
Well, it should do a few things that I hope will happen. A, it's going to streamline our processes because it has some automatic rules for proving copyright. So make that process faster for faculty. It will give faculty analytics so they'll know if their things are being read or not. I would run reports on our kiosks and discover that like maybe a third of the items that faculty put on reserve were never even touched. And we would communicate that out to faculty, but with Leganto, it's something that they can look at those analytics themselves and see if students are engaging with it and then adapt accordingly. And the students, it's a much nicer interface for students in doing those readings through Leganto, and the way they can be structured, in the way they can be organized. So I think it's a better user, we'll have a better user experience for students. Faculty will understand if what they're putting on reserve really and truly makes sense, because they'll have those readily available, generate when they're interested analytics about their readings. I mean, they could course correct partway through the term if students weren't reading. So those are the things, and we will have more efficient processes.
Sounds like flexibility. And you said it was all through D2L in your case.
That's right.
Right, got it. All right, thank you very much. Justin, over to you.
We were really focused on seeing how we could support students in need, students that would normally come to our building to use our computers. We have a pretty large amount of laptops that we borrow out, and students could take those out for 3 weeks. They would quarantine on return. We've recently added more computers to that pool. We've taken laptops from other parts of the building that aren't currently being used now that we're closed. So starting in January, we should have over 200 laptops available, most of which will be available for full-term loans. Something else new that we are getting just this week are 25 mobile hotspots. And these are hotspots students could sign out, and it provides them with a little wireless network. So at home, they could use their computer if they don't have internet to do their homework, research, write their exams. We also started a digitization request service. This was aimed to provide a short-term course reserve loans, making them available to students that had to read those required readings. One problem that we ran into was we didn't have a controlled way of sending these book chapters to students and faculty. As I mentioned earlier on, something pre-COVID, we were looking for a solution for our streaming videos, and we ran across Alma Digital. And we signed Alma Digital, we got that up and running, which allowed us to put all these PDF versions of these digitized book chapters online. And what that allows us to do is put access controls on there. So we can make sure people are logged into our discovery interface. We can we can assign how many people consecutively can look at the document. Are they allowed to download the PDF or not? And we've had over 700 digitization requests since we've done this. And that's how they are being delivered through Elma Digital right now. We've had an obvious focus on just digital, creating new pages and resources for students and faculty on our website. As Susan mentioned, that's using Seats was one of the things we did to prepare for our build-in opening. Well, actually, after the opening, we recently just launched Seats. We were pretty late at that. And I also mentioned about the new wireless presentation devices that we were installing in our group rooms. So that allowed us to take out the resident computers and cables and keyboards out of each of those group rooms, which actually took out touch points for students. So nobody had to touch a shared device. They could bring in their own devices.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I move over to Dale, Susan, you have a question from someone saying you've always been focused exclusively on Leganto as a reading list management system. Have you explored or had you explored other alternatives such as Thales Aspire?
And yes, I've just been focused on Leganto because it integrated with Alma and Primo. And that was my objective. We had Aries. We hadn't implemented some of the features of Aries, and it was a challenge to work with. So we'd had experience with that one tool. And then I'd heard positive things from this vice provost about Leganto when she'd seen it. And because of the integration, I didn't actually look any further.
Got it. Thank you very much. And a follow-up question for Dale. The person asks, I know University of Alberta, and I'll just read the question. I know the University of Alberta recently deployed Thales Aspire, and I would be curious as to Dale's observations with respect to the University of Alberta's experiences with it.
I can't really speak to it. So because we've gone with Leganto, and actually I'm not even sure if Aspire was on our radar at that point, but certainly our thought process echoes what happened at U of C, where it's a tool that's integrated very closely with our physical reserves and with our existing library management system. So it just made sense in those circumstances. So
got it. All right. I'm also going to check the Q&A. Actually, Dale, why don't you go on and take on this the remainder of the year?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of similar milestones for us at the University of Regina compared to Mount Royal and U of C, although slightly different timelines. So one of the things that we had implemented very early on, basically the first week we were out, was the digitization request things. And so we were actually later with implementing, we had a mail out service, which I gather is not widely implemented at other places, and then finally a pickup service in September 2020. So we were later rolling out our pickup service, but that's largely because we had dealt with requests for physical materials through mail out and through digitization, which was which addressed a lot of the need there. Since March, we've processed over 1,150 digitization requests, either for individual study and a lot for learning management, the course reservation system. And a lot of the work was for reintroducing physical borrowing safely was, again, we had the foundation of technology in place, and it was streamlining our processes. So what had started out as digitization and mail out, and eventually when we turned on the requests, because we didn't use requests, we've only got 4 sites right on campus. So we turned on the request system as well, and we merged all 3 through the request form in Alma and Primo, just to streamline everything. So that was a lot of our transition throughout the summer in terms of bringing in requests. The other big piece was reintroducing students to the library space. Students and I guess other and faculty members and other staff as well. So we did open up reservations in July for people who wanted to come on site for archival visits or consult with material. And then we set up LibCal seats in midsummer for space reservations in the fall for solo study spaces, computers, and then also e-proctored exam rooms. So again, it's one of those things where we could license the software, have it available right away, and it's something I'm sure we'll keep afterwards. It's really great software, and but behind the scenes, there's all this work that has to happen in terms of human processes to, make sure there's people on site to check people in and set them up at their computer. So it's the technology aspect. The technology just makes it easier to do that now, I think. The other thing that I don't think anyone's mentioned yet, we did introduce the HathiTrust emergency collection. And that was another case where just having Alma and Primo, it was work to implement, but I don't think as much as it could have been with other learning or library management systems. And I would say it's fairly seamless for people to access HathiTrust emergency collection titles through our Primo discovery system.
Got it. Thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions. I'm going to read them out, and then whichever of you thinks it's is best positioned to answer it. Were ebooks only items already available via third-party vendors, or were you able to add materials that were negotiated on a case-by-case basis with publishers? In other words, were you limited to third-party vendors?
I can speak to that. Okay. Yeah, I can't speak to that because our collections team handles all of that.
Okay. All right. That's we just don't have the answer. So you do not have the answer to that, right?
No.
No. Is that something that would be difficult for you to get an answer to, and I could share it with the?
Well, I think Rob Thiessen is in attendance. Rob, are you able to answer that question?
If he sends in the answer via a message, then I can read it out.
Okay.
All right. Let me find my mouse again and scroll down. The same person also asked, sorry, I missed that. You were able to limit the number of simultaneous users using Alma Digital DRM, ?
That's correct. You can set how many concurrent users can view the material. You can also do other things like limit it to DNS. You can put embargo dates, IP ranges. Are they logged in? If they are logged in, what user group can see it? So it's been very handy for us.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Another question. What sustainability issues do you see going forward, all three panelists? Now, if you don't want to answer this question right now, but during the next slide, that's also fine, but I'll read the question. The questioner asks, I, for one, worry about the leased library collection resources being integrated into courses via platforms like Leganto. Titles disappear at vendor discretion in the middle of the term.
I can just say that's definitely a concern and definitely something we've seen and something that was just an ongoing issue that we have to address, certainly. And that's where we've been on Leganto a few months longer than Susan, so perhaps I can't say we've seen a lot of those problems, but it has come up. So,
okay. I guess with every strength comes a weakness, right? Robert has come back. Thank you, Robert. We buy our ebooks from 7 to 8 platforms that we have licensed. To buy an ebook from a platform that we have not licensed requires negotiating a new license. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, just send a follow-up. And let's move to the final slide. So moving on. So let's put on our visionary spectacles. Dale, you take it away first. What are you thinking? And it's okay to not have a budget, to be uncertain about enrollment and what the short-term future is, in terms of playing the victim role. It's okay to be uncertain, but if you could have access to whatever you needed, what do you wish or dream you could do over the next few years?
All right. So, well, I think one of the questions I have over the next 2 to 3 years is where will we be with a hybrid model? So now that we've been to, and I mean this, I think, in terms of the larger university, in terms of instruction and things like that, is now that we've been pushed to do remote like this, what does that mean in terms of what teaching and learning looks like in the next few years, and how does the library think about that? So I know there's been lots of discussion around how instructors kind of were reluctant users of our learning management system, but now they see the affordances of the technology. So it's kind of being where people can identify where the e-learning aspect makes sense and where in-classroom learning is necessary. And so I think that will come to us to kind of consider the same. And when do we need the student to physically come to the library for a reference consultation? We've been in a situation where a lot of times we do think in terms of the physical space and in terms of the service desk and meeting on site. But there's, as this is proven, that's really not a requirement in many cases. And so I think I'm just curious to where that will go in the next few years. I'm not sure if I have any big ideas about that at the moment, but I think what I'd like to see is that we consider that moving forward, like what is the best for student experience, for student learning, for equity, in terms of a lot of times students who are on campus do have access to more services than students who are working at a distance. And so I think there's lots of opportunities to think about that there. And I hope we emerge with a model that really considers the student situation then and what individual students require as their learning, as part of their learning needs, and combined with the curriculum support that they need then too. So I'm not sure if I have any big visions there about that, but I do think that I hope it can lead to more flexible learning and more accustomed to the needs of individual students then, and also I guess perhaps naively, I feel like this has pushed a lot of, at least at University of Regina, where they've introduced a zero cost program throughout this as well, a campus-wide zero cost initiative that I certainly there's been more concern about the money that students are spending more this year than than previous years, and so I hope there's some thought put into sustainability there as well.
Thanks a lot, Dale. I have a bunch of questions, but to be fair, I just want to give the others a chance to speak. Audience, please throw in your ideas, even if it's 1 word or 2 words for a topic that you think you are considering over the next 2 to 5 years. Throw it in and we can use that as fodder for discussion with the panel. Susan.
I think that in the next 2 to 3 years, I think student expectations are shifting and faculty expectations are shifting. Prior to COVID, we were offering chat reference 9 to 4. We're now offering it, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. I don't think we're going to be able to pull back from that because that's what students are doing. Work in the evenings and not from home, not necessarily from the library. So I think our service delivery models are going to have to shift, and that things that we've introduced to meet the COVID restrictions are simply going to become a new way of doing things. I think chat reference is one example. I think that delivering instruction through Zoom and recording it and making it available asynchronously I'm not sure I'm saying that right, is another, so that the student can get at that information when they need it, not when we have been able to negotiate with the faculty member to deliver it. So I think that those kinds of things that extend our services out and make them available at the point of need are going to continue. And I hope that they do. I think some print's going to make a comeback. We will have to deliver, because there are some materials that are very difficult to deliver in an e-format. So we will have a little bit of print reserve, but I think most of it's going to be e. I think it's going to be, although users complain a little bit about the way the Haughty books are managed and the reading experience, I think when ETAS ends and we no longer have an additional 1.2 million materials in full text, that's going to create a lot of pressure as well. Because all of a sudden, oh, you got to go to the library to get that book. It's not just on your desktop if you need to look up something or check a paragraph or you want to read it quickly. So I think that we're going to see additional pressures around the resources and services that we've provided. Yeah, those are some of the things. And then we've got to figure out how we're going to sustain them, how we're going to staff them, how we're going to staff chat reference, for example, and a reference desk. So our whole service delivery is going to, I think, look quite different in 3 years.
Lovely. Susan, before I hand over to Justin, there's one more question come in about CDL. So is anyone investigating implementing a controlled digital lending service, CDL, wherein select print resources are scanned and made available as electronic resources with appropriate DRM and one-to-one ratio with copies owned?
We've investigated that. Again, with Elma Digital, we have the way of delivering that to one concurrent user at a time, limiting how much time they have with an item. But right now with the whole digitization service, we're doing a review of what that could look like in the future. How much do we do? Do we have the scanners we need to do that? That's a segue into my post-COVID talk. I don't want to cut off Sarah or Dale if they have any insights.
I was just going to add, we've discussed it, but yeah, it's and the technology is largely there. It's just the scanning that we're talking about too. So,
and I can't really speak to that. I haven't been in those conversations.
Very good. Okay, Justin, wrap it up for us. Post-COVID, the future.
So as I mentioned, digitization, one of the things we're looking at is we did offer it as a big service. Do we need to get partially our automated book scanners that we can flip the pages, it takes the photos of them quickly, it pieces together PDF, and then we can put that in Elma Digital. We know we could do it, and again, it's just looking at how much money that would cost for the actual equipment and staff resources. We have no plans on that yet, but something we are interested in. I agree with what Susan said about how expectation is going to continue. It's also good. The way somebody at my library told me is it also gives us a chance to kind of do a restart. So maybe we were doing things in person, and now we can kind of look back at and review all those different processes and see where we can do things better. And people have been away from our building for so long that it lets us introduce new things. We're a high demand building, so looking at rolling out seats for maybe some of our more specialized computers. I know some of our faculty members love the virtual appointments. They've told me they'd rather do virtual than do physical. So maybe offering students the choice, do you want to meet virtually or in person? One thing that I'm looking at is our off-campus authentication or proxy authentication. We all know how important that is, especially now that we're all working remotely. But maybe going to a cloud provided service, and you gain so many wonderful things doing a cloud hosted service, as Dell touched on, where it could automatically subscribe to stanza updates, which means less downtime for students and also much less staff time trying to figure out all these issues. We are planning on rolling out some book lockers for our reserves in the springtime and doing some extensive usability tests. And again, we've tried a whole bunch of new things digitally online. Do they make sense? And how can, let's evaluate that. Are people finding what they need? And if not, how can we make that better?
Great. Thank you very much, Justin. Much appreciated. We have a couple of more questions here. One was, could you clarify what you mean by campus-wide zero cost and whether the library had anything to do to support that initiative?
Yeah, certainly. So yes, it was something that came up just pre-COVID, but basically what the zero cost initiative, it's modeled after Consequently, but it's labeling courses without any additional course material costs as zero cost materials in the when students are registering. So they see, oh, I've got this class here. There are no additional material costs on top of that in terms of textbooks or other things like that. One of the places where the library played a role, and I think it's actually it's the challenge of getting our textbook program was so popular before this for reserves. It was a large part of our circulation, and so that was largely cut off after with COVID because we could no longer circulate textbooks efficiently, and there's no equivalent there, and so we had a lot of instructors who are looking at student costs, looking at what the textbook they've been teaching for the last 5-10 years and thinking, well, are there other options out there? So one place, our liaison librarians have been working with instructors to find alternatives. One place where I'll just have one example of math and stats courses in first and second year switched over to completely free resources, and free meaning either library licensed but free to students resources, thanks to the work of our liaison librarian, Charles Phelps. And so it's those success stories that are really nice. So basically the students don't have any added cost. They're leveraging the money that the library is paying or the money that we're investing in open educational resources, and they have a platform where they can have all those resources assembled for them in a nice list in Leganto. So it's just it's a nice merging of several different trends there.
Thanks for clearing that up, Dale. And before, I'm going to ask one more question, but I'm going to ask my panelists to think about, I didn't give them a heads up on this, but one fear and one hope for next year. But I've got a more specific question, but whoever doesn't answer that question can think in a panic-like manner. So the other question I have is, there was a massive move to online, remote learning, electronic resources. It sounds awfully like flattening the world. Do you believe, any of you believe that some institutions are, in the long haul, are going to do a better job than others, and therefore increase enrollment, not just to students that come on campus, but students that are in other parts of the country, other parts of the continent or the world? Do you think this has flattened the world?
That's a really interesting question, because I do believe that some institutions will be better at delivering online, and that ultimately that'll be a selling feature for them, because students don't have to move unless they want to. And there are pros and cons around all of that. But I do think that that will be a selling feature for institutions if they're able to make that move, or move to a hybrid model. So some things are delivered online and some things are delivered in person. But I think that that is going to be a distinguisher for institutions, not next year, but in the next few years, their ability to do that and do it well. And I think we can all think of institutions who deliver online courses and do a really good job of it. And I think the rest of us have to figure that out and get behind it. But it is going to be, it will be a point of distinction.
Anyone else want to chime in? Because I have a follow-up question for Susan.
Yeah, I know in Alberta that we have some pretty large financial cuts and pressures coming at us. It seems like having a hybrid model would be something that would help us in that case, where we might not be getting the giant capital, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments for giant new shiny buildings, but an easy way to increase revenue and students could be to offer additional classes online.
Okay. My follow-up question is, logically then, if let's just say one institution, one of the three of you really master this for the perfect online experience. I'm not saying Amazon's perfect, but they do a pretty good online shopping experience. Let's say one of you three master it, and it's the best thing in the world. Does that become a threat to other institutions?
I think by the time you master something, everything's changing so quick and dynamically that you can't just sit back and be happy where you're at, or you're going to be behind. I think the challenge for us is always trying to stay with
Head of the curve.
the changing landscapes and making changes so we continue being the best at what we do.
Fantastic.
I would also add that there are already schools who have been doing this, like an increased focus on online education for a number of years. So they may not to say we all haven't, but some places have really focused on it. So it may be that that's already, they're 15 years ahead or something as well. So, but I don't know. That's
very good. Okay, so with the 2 minutes we have remaining, 20 to 30 seconds. If you want to, or if you don't want to answer, that's also fine. A fear or something you're concerned about for 2021, and one hope or optimism for 2021. Who wants to go first?
Well, for me, they're one and the same. Essentially, my fear is COVID won't end, and my hope is that it will, and we'll be into our new normal at some point this year.
I think there's a lot of people who would join you. Who would like to go second?
My hope is that we just continue to evolve. We've been doing that, but COVID it forced us to, if we liked it or not, and forces as an institution. But COVID or not, let's just continue evaluating and improving our experience for faculty and students.
Fantastic.
yeah.
And
I would just say that my hope is that we can take what we've learned from this and kind of apply it to whatever our future model looks like, because there's a lot to learn and yeah, I guess my fear is that we won't at all.
And with that, I'd like to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in and listening to my panel. Susan, Dale, Justin, thank you to you and your institutions for giving you the time to share your insight with everyone. With that, it's my last webinar of the year. Have a great holiday break and a great and safe holiday break. And with that, thank you very much. Bye-bye.